I realized the season had changed when the sunlight began to thin over the backyard grass. Late September in Vermont always carried the first gentle chill, just enough to make an afternoon cup of tea feel necessary, and the wind in the deep red maple leaves seemed to whisper more than usual. I was sitting there as I did every day on the old wooden chair, a light coat draped loosely over my shoulders, a book in my hand that I had not turned to the next page. Not because I had forgotten, but because I was looking at the envelope in my palm, hesitating to open it. It was sent from Martha's house, my daughter, addressed in careful handwriting. To Harold Givens. The penmanship was Olivia's, my granddaughter, still exactly the same as when she was little, and wrote "Happy Birthday, Papa Harold" in green marker on every card. I opened the envelope slowly, not out of fear, only intuition. Inside was a wedding invitation. Raised gold lettering on thick, luxurious paper, exactly the style Olivia loved. Modern elegance, she called it. The bride's name, Olivia Grace Hamilton. The groom, Brandon Scott Delaney. The wedding date, 15th of October, at a greenhouse venue in Massachusetts. The guest list was printed separately on an attached insert. I scanned down the names, then went back to check more carefully. Each line held only the names of people from the groom's family, his friends, work partners, schoolmates. Some I had never even heard of, but my name was not there. No Papa Harold, no grandfather Harold Givens, not a trace. I turned back to the first page, looking closer. A small line at the bottom read, "We respectfully invite the Givens family. If you cannot attend, please join via live stream." I closed my eyes, not to stop tears, but to keep my heart from stirring. That evening, Martha called the family together for a casual dinner. I arrived on time, as I had for more than a dozen years. Since my son-in-law's death, I had been the one who kept the family from scattering. Olivia smiled brightly when she saw me, but her gaze didn't linger. She seemed to avoid me. Martha was warm, pulling out a chair, asking if I could eat the stew that wasn't too salty. All through the meal, no one mentioned the invitation. No one asked if I had received the letter. Not a word from Olivia. When I set my spoon down, Martha finally shifted the conversation. "You know, Dad, Olivia's wedding is more of a new format, a modern style. We're only inviting people who are really close to her generation. So it won't be a full gathering of relatives." I looked straight into my daughter's eyes. "Close in what way?" I asked, my tone no sharper than if I were asking tomorrow's weather. Martha looked uneasy, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Don't misunderstand. She just thinks the wedding should be light, streamlined. Younger guests connect more easily. They're live streaming the whole event anyway. You can watch with friends if you like." I smiled, a small smile that only someone familiar with hurt would recognize as the kind that comes from being too used to it. "I have already read the real meaning in your eyes. No need to explain." The table went silent for a beat. Olivia turned away, pretending to talk to her fiancé. Martha lowered her head. I stood, excused myself early. No one stopped me. No one asked another question, as if I had never been there. That night, I sat again on the wooden chair outside, laptop on my knees. I typed into the search bar, "Iceland Aurora Borealis Tours, October departures." It was a trip my wife and I had once planned, but cancer had taken that chance from us. Now I decided I would go alone. I booked a 7-day tour departing exactly 3 days before Olivia's wedding. It included private airport pickup, northern lights viewing, hot spring baths, and a stop in a small village near the Jökulsárlón Glacier Lagoon. I chose the non-refundable package because I had no intention of returning, just in case someone suddenly remembered my existence in this family. I told no one, not Martha, not Olivia. I didn't post on Facebook. I only wrote one line in my late wife's old notebook. "Tomorrow, I'm going to Iceland. The trip we missed. You're not here, but I think you'd agree." The night wind slipped through the trees, spinning a few dry leaves across the ground. I poured more tea, breathing in the scent of dry grass and damp, rotting wood after a light afternoon rain. I was not angry. I was not heartbroken. It was just the first time I felt myself removed from a story I had written nearly 3/4 of the way through. If you have ever been pushed out of an important moment in life, not because you were unworthy, but because they thought you would not react, then this story is for you. Subscribe to hear more journeys of silent retaliation, and share if you have ever been forgotten in your own family. Silence is not weakness. It is the first step toward freedom. I once thought that at 70, nothing could truly surprise me. But it turns out people do not need to shout in your face to betray you. Sometimes all they have to do is choose not to mention you anymore. And everything becomes clearer the longer they stay silent. 20 years ago, I lost my wife. Elaine passed after a short round of chemotherapy, so quickly I had no time to prepare. I still remember the smell of the blanket fabric in the hospice room, the steady beeping of the monitor marking her final heartbeats, and her hands growing cold without a single tremor. I stood beside her bed, holding her hand until the clock's second hand stopped moving. That same year, my son-in-law, Martha's husband, was killed in a traffic accident. He was an engineer working a night shift at the factory outside town. A truck carrying materials overturned on a curve, crushing his car. Martha fell into crisis almost immediately after barely climbing out of her mother's funeral. Olivia, only 5 at the time, still didn't understand what forever meant. No one told me what to do. I simply cleared out my study and turned it into a bedroom for Olivia. I took down the bookshelves, repaired the loose window frame, replaced the curtains, and every night told her a story, most of which I made up on the spot. Olivia began calling me Papa Harold when she was 6. She never called anyone else Papa. I never asked her to, maybe because I was the one who took her to school, brought her home, taught her to ride a bike, prepared Halloween costumes, baked apple pies on weekends. We once planted a small maple tree by the porch, and she called it our tree. She once said that when she got married, she wanted me to walk her down the aisle. Mom will cry, but Papa has to hold it in. I had thought that if I lived to see that day, I would sew my old suit to fit, just to keep that promise. But then Martha decided to move. She remarried a man named Charles Dunhill, owner of a high-end jewelry store chain. Olivia went with her to live in Boston. I didn't object. I understood my daughter needed to rebuild her life, and I didn't want to be an obstacle. For the first few months, Olivia still called every week, sometimes just to say what she had for lunch, sometimes to show off a sweater her stepmother picked out. I nodded, took note, sent postcards during the holidays. But then the calls became less frequent. By the third Christmas, I received a printed card signed by Martha and Charles. No handwritten note from Olivia. The first time I went to one of her high school concerts, the invitation came through Martha's email. The words grandfather were nowhere in it. I still went. Sat in the back row with a bouquet I had cut from my backyard. Olivia didn't see me, or she saw me and chose not to. I still remember the way she turned and ran toward a man in a cashmere sweater who placed his hand on her shoulder. I looked on and thought I had officially been replaced with a more polished, more expensive, more presentable version for wealthy friends, I told myself. Everyone grows up, and in the process they may need to leave behind some old things. I just didn't know I was one of those things. When I got the wedding invitation, I checked 3 times. My name was not on the list. Only Gibbons family. No Harold, no Papa, no reserved seat of honor, no personal note. Another small detail. The card was printed at a luxury studio in California. I knew because I had once taught my students to examine the font when writing letters. And this card, though expensive, had no trace of anything personal. I had once been at the center of Olivia's childhood. Now I was just a surname in faint print. Worse than a shadow, tipo. At least a shadow follows a person until the end of the day. I do not blame Olivia for growing up. I only regret that in the process she had to learn to rename the people from her past. And I am not part of that new version. I could blame Martha because she knew very well the bond between me and her daughter, yet she chose silence. But silence often is not because they do not know what to say, but because they think you will not react. Once I saw an Instagram post of Olivia's. She was hugging her stepmother and stepfather, captioned, "Family isn't always blood. It's who stands with you." I nodded. True. But the one who had stood by her side for the first 10 years of her life no longer had a place at her wedding. I took Olivia's photo off the shelf, dusted it, and placed it in a wooden box. There was no pain, just an emptiness. Dull, long, and familiar. Not because I was excluded, But because I realized I had only ever been kept because they had not yet found a better replacement, and now they had. I do not know why I opened Instagram that night. Maybe it was just an old instinct. That vague pull to see a little more of Olivia, even though I knew most of her photos now were flowers, wedding mood boards, and invitation cards shot under flat white light like a showroom ad. I no longer followed her account. I had unfollowed her 2 years earlier when she posted a Christmas photo with Martha, Charles, and Brandon, the four of them in matching red sweaters sitting beside a large tree. The caption read, "Family means everything." I did not take a screenshot. I did not save it. But the line stayed in my head longer than I expected. That night, I searched for Olivia's account again. I only meant to glance through a few wedding photos. But then I saw a story tagged with a behind-the-scenes video. A short clip made by the filming service showing laughter behind the stage. Olivia trying on her dress, Brandon pinning his boutonniere, Martha beside him adjusting the sleeve of her future son-in-law. Warm atmosphere, soft jazz in the background, everything perfectly harmless. Until Olivia turned toward the camera, laughed, and said, "We did not invite Papa Harold. He is a bit old-fashioned. It would not match the vibe." The moment the words left her mouth, Brandon laughed too. Martha froze for a second, then nodded, feigning reluctant agreement. I paused the video. Olivia's eyes when she said it carried no malice. She said it like telling a light-hearted story about someone from the past, someone who was once endearing but now a little out of place. Like an old typewriter kept on a bookshelf, fine as decoration, but no one expects it to write a novel. I watched it 3 times. No anger, no sigh. Only a strange sensation, as if a small stone had just dropped inside me, not big enough to cause ripples, but heavy enough not to sink away. I called Martha. The first time, she did not answer. The second, it went to voicemail. The third, I left a short message. "I just want to know if you truly agree with what Olivia said about me. If yes, then stay silent. If not, there is no need to answer." I walked around the house once before going to my room. Night had settled over the back garden. The maple Olivia once planted was now nearly as tall as the eaves, its leaves glowing red like a half-burned fire. I sat on the wooden steps, took out my phone, and called George. George was a longtime friend, a retired doctor who had once lived in New Hampshire, now moved closer to care for his wife with Parkinson's. He was one of the few who never checked on me out of politeness. Every call began with the same line. "So what is it this time, Harold?" I told George about the clip, about Olivia, about those words. A bit old-fashioned, not a match for the vibe. George chuckled softly on the other end, the sound of a teacup tapping a saucer. "And what did you expect them to say? Did you hope your granddaughter would stand up in the middle of the reception, raise her glass, and shout, 'If it weren't for Papa Harold, I wouldn't be here today'? No one does that. Young people, they live in the moment, and the moment has no memory." I stayed silent. George went on, "But if they think you are the past, then let them live without it. See what they build without the old bricks. You do not need to reclaim a place. You just step away and let them feel the space when you are gone." His words stayed with me longer than I thought. The next morning, I went back to the Iceland tour page I had browsed last month. Northern Lights viewing, glacier walks, lodging in a small village by the bay, where there is almost no cell service, no internet, only natural light and the sound of wind scraping at the wooden door each morning. I booked it, non-refundable, no changes. Departure 3 days before the wedding. I began packing. For the first time in 10 years, I did not bring any family photos. No picture of Olivia in her princess dress. No picture of Elaine in her knitting showroom. No summer postcards. Only my old fur coat, a notebook, and a film camera. I told no one. Not Martha, not Olivia. I left only a small note on the kitchen table. Going to find a place where the light is real enough not to need color correction. Before locking the door, I stopped at the bookshelf, pulled out a black notebook, where I had written down things Olivia said as a child. The last page held a scrawl from when she was 8. "Papa is my home." I closed it, then placed it back. A house, if someone chooses to forget it, is only a nameless roof in their memory. But for me, home is still here, and I am leaving. Not because I was pushed, but because I will not keep holding the place of someone everyone believes is already old enough to be left behind. I do not know if it was because the airplane cabin felt colder than usual, or because that letter had never truly aged, but my eyes stung when I read Olivia's handwriting from when she was 13. The letter, folded 4 times and pressed between the pages of an old book, still held the uneven strokes of purple ink from a young hand. Papa will always be the first person I want to tell every secret. I hope when I grow up, I can still sit on the steps with Papa each winter afternoon, telling him everything, even who I like in class. I had read that letter dozens of times, but never had it felt as distant as it did now. Olivia had grown up, and instead of sharing secrets, she chose to share her weddings behind the scenes with thousands of followers, while I had to dig through an old story just to discover I had been crossed off the list. I folded the letter again and slipped it into my coat pocket. On the screen ahead, the flight map showed us crossing the North Atlantic. I felt lighter, as if every mile beneath us took away a little more of the heaviness. Maybe it was because, for the first time in years, I was heading somewhere that held no past of mine. I pulled out my phone, took a quick photo through the airplane window. Nothing in focus, just a blur of white clouds against pale gray sky. I posted it on Facebook with a short caption, "Searching for a place where I have never been forgotten." I did not wait for likes. I did not need anyone to ask where I was going. I did not write it to answer. I wrote it to remind myself. I was leaving an old chapter, one where my name existed only in memory, no longer on an invitation. I arrived in Iceland at midday under a pale gray sky with wind funneling sharply through the rocks. The driver, holding my name on a placard, greeted me in slow English, then invited me into the car. We drove past snow-dusted basalt fields and nameless cold mountains. No music, no conversation. Only the sound of the tires rolling over wet, icy roads. After more than 2 hours, the car stopped at a small wooden lodge by a glacier. My home for the next 5 nights. The lodge had 3 rooms, a shared dining space, and a fireplace set in the middle of the common area. The scent of pine wood and melting snow filled the air. The manager handed me a key and pointed to a shortcut to the riverbank. I set down my bags, opened the window of my room, and for the first time in months, I smiled. A smile not forced, not for politeness, not to reassure anyone. Just a simple smile. From a man standing in a place where no one knew he had once been forgotten. I took out my phone. No messages, no posts. I went into settings, switched to airplane mode, and then powered it off completely. I placed the phone into the wooden drawer, closed it, then opened my notebook and wrote one simple line. The wedding does not need me, so I will go far, for real. On the first day, I did not go out. I sat by the glass door looking out at Jökulsárlón Glacier Lagoon. The deep blue water, the icebergs drifting like dissolving memories. I had brought an unfinished novel but did not read it. I drank tea, looked at the sky, and thought of nothing. That night, the manager knocked on my door to say, "Tonight, there's a chance to see the northern lights." I put on my thick coat, pulled down my wool hat, and walked to the riverbank. The wind was strong, the icy grit slipping into my collar, but I did not feel cold. I stood there for an hour, then 2. At last, a faint green ribbon appeared on the far horizon, shredding into a thin silk veil. Not dazzling, not flawless like in the advertisements, but real. I looked up at it and, without meaning to, laughed quietly to myself. I had once wanted Olivia to see this, so she would understand what beauty without color correction looked like. But now I no longer wanted to mention her. I just stood there, watching a light I did not need anyone's permission to witness. No invitation, no role in a ceremony. The next day, I walked through the snow with a small tour group, a French couple and a retired school teacher from Michigan. No one asked what I did for a living. No one asked if I had a family. We talked only about the weather, dinner, and the strange cracks on the ice. That evening, I returned to my room, lit the fireplace, and took out my old notebook to write. No one here calls me Papa Harold, but no one here cuts me from the list either. Maybe that's the only thing I need. I knew Olivia was preparing for her wedding rehearsal. I knew Martha was busy with guests and menus. I knew they would not message me, believing I was at home, quietly sulking, waiting for a late phone call. They did not know I had already gone far, not just in distance, but in heart, and I did not need them to know. The snow outside fell steadily on the roof, unhurried, quiet. A rhythm of stillness I had long lost. For the first time, I did not feel like an extra in someone else's life. I was simply myself, sitting in a wide field of white and finally needing no one's permission to belong. I turned my phone on only because I wanted to capture a rare moment. The northern lights had just appeared across the dark sky, a pale green wash spreading like a stroke of watercolor on coarse fabric. The light was not as dazzling as in the advertisements, but it was so real my hand froze for a few seconds, as if afraid a sound might make it vanish. But as soon as the screen lit up, I saw it. 43 missed calls. From Olivia, from Martha, from an unfamiliar number I guess belonged to Charles, Olivia's stepfather. A few others from Massachusetts. I did not press anything right away. I opened the message list. The first from Martha. Dad, the groom is gone. Olivia fainted. I do not know what to do. The next, Papa. I was wrong. I need you. I'm sorry. I never thought it would end up like this. A series from an unknown number. Please call back. Everything is in chaos. She said only one name. Papa Harold. I sat down on the wooden bench by the lodge porch in the sub-zero Icelandic night, and I smiled. Not the bitter or mocking kind, just a light smile from someone who finally sees that what he once thought was only a possibility has become undeniable. I did not answer. I opened the camera app again and took a photo of the sky spilling green light, sent a single image to the message thread without specifying a recipient. The caption read only, "Everyone sees the light in their own way." I did not wait for them to reply. I opened my contacts and blocked each number in turn. Olivia, Martha, Charles, a few other unfamiliar names. I did not block them out of anger. I blocked them to protect the quiet I had waited my whole life to have in these days. Then I opened my leather notebook and wrote a single line in deep blue ink, the letters trembling slightly from the cold wind. I have not abandoned anyone. I have simply taken leave from a position where I was never valued. I did not know exactly what had happened, but I could guess. Brandon, the groom, must have had some argument and left. Olivia collapsed. The family panicked. And in that moment, when all the modern people they trusted had no idea what to do, they thought of me, the one they had called old-fashioned, and out of place. I pictured it in my mind. A wedding with 150 guests, warm amber lights, soft jazz, a long table filled with flowers and printed menus. Then suddenly everything stopped. The bride's face drained of color. Her mother rushed in, her stepfather made call after call, guests started whispering, and somewhere the name Papa Harold slipped from someone's mouth, as if they had forgotten they had erased it from the final printed list. They called me not because I was the only one who could fix it. They called because they forgot they had once cut me out, and now there was only emptiness. I spent the rest of the evening drinking hot tea, warming by the wood stove, watching the fire dance on the hearth. No music, no TV, no news. I felt no need to know any more details, because for the first time, not knowing felt like the greatest relief. The next morning, I opened my window and let the snowy wind hit my face, the scent of pine and melting ice rushing in. I poured coffee, stood on the porch, and looked at the glacier drifting in silence, the pale green water, the ice floating slowly. On the largest block, a seabird stood motionless. No song, no wings spread, just looking into the distance. I thought of Olivia, not the Olivia from last night, the Olivia at 8 years old, the one who sat in my lap holding a picture book and asked, "Papa, why does the sky have northern lights?" I once told her. "Because sometimes it gets so cold that even the light has to change color to keep people warm." Now I no longer wanted to explain, because everyone has to walk through their own darkness. And sometimes they must learn to light their own way when there is no one left to lean on. That night, I received one final message from an unknown number before turning off my phone for good. They say you are cruel, but I think, maybe for the first time, you are simply living honestly. No name, no clear sender. I read it once, then deleted it. I closed my notebook, slipped it into my coat pocket, and stepped outside. Stood in the middle of the white snowfield. Looked up. Not everyone is cold enough to lose the person who loved them most. But once they do, the cost is never as simple as a missed call. It is the permanent loss of a place, of someone who stayed when everyone else left. And this time, it was I, who chose to leave first. No noise, no bitterness, just a light step back, and everything behind collapses on its own. That night, after finishing dinner in the shared wooden lodge, I was invited over for tea by a young couple. They were Sam and Elise, Americans, as they introduced themselves, on what they called a career break to rediscover themselves after 30. Their manner of speaking was gentle yet intelligent. They were not loud, not nosy about personal matters, and even asked if I minded them starting a conversation. That simple courtesy was enough to make me feel at ease. We talked about the sky, about the snow, about volcanoes lying dormant beneath the frozen earth. Then, as often happens in casual talk with younger people, Elise asked, "So you are traveling alone, not a family vacation?" I smiled, nodded. Taking a sip of hot ginger tea, I said, my tone touched with light humor, "My family is busy with a wedding I was not invited to. I am busy chasing the northern lights to see if anyone out in the universe still remembers me." They both laughed, not out of pity, but because they understood the mild sting inside of a life story. Sam raised his eyebrows. "You mean, you were really left out of a family wedding?" I nodded, slowly recounting it. Not in detail, not in full. I did not need anyone to take my side. I only told it so they would understand it had happened, and that I no longer felt shame or pain over it. Elise looked at me, her eyes bright. "You know, you are the first person we have met who can say that with a real smile." They asked permission to record a short video, just me sitting in the snow, holding a cup of tea, saying a few lines like that. I did not overthink it. I agreed on one condition. Do not use my real name. Just call me an old man who wandered away from a wedding. I did not know that video would spread so quickly. A week after I returned to Vermont, Sam emailed me. "Mr. Harold, your video now has over 3 million views on TikTok. Thousands of comments. Everyone is asking. Everyone. Will the old man come back?" I laughed and shook my head. No, I had no intention of returning to any place that once crossed my name off the list. Then one day I received an invitation. This time not a gold embossed card, not a wedding, but from a nonprofit called Elder Voices. They organize forums on the role and value of older people in modern society. In their letter they wrote, "We happened to see your video and felt something very true. That respect should not be begged for, but maintained. If you are willing, we would be honored to have you join our forum, The Forgotten Place in the Modern Family, to share your thoughts." I read the letter over and over, not because I was surprised, but because for the first time in many years I felt a place wanted to listen, not to fix, but to understand. I agreed, not because I wanted to go back or speak out. I simply realized I no longer needed to hide. The talk took place in a small hall in Portland, Oregon. The audience was not large, about 60 people, all ages. Some elderly, hands trembling as they held their spouses. Some young adults with their mothers. One middle-aged woman sat alone, tears falling quietly as I said, "There are children who grow up with hugs and promises of you will never forget. But one day they learn to choose the photo that fits the scene better, and you are no longer in it." I did not speak with bitterness, only with truth, and a truth, when spoken calmly, often cuts deeper than any accusation. At the end of the session, a man came forward and held my hand for a long time. He said, "Thank you for not turning your story into a complaint, but into a way for us to reflect on how we treat those who once held everything together." I did not answer. I only gave his hand a slight squeeze, then stepped outside, taking a deep breath of early spring air rolling in. From that day on, I began to write again. Not memoirs, not an autobiography, just short pieces, notes on feelings, on things I saw while sitting alone in my old wooden house in Vermont. I printed small batches, gave them out for free at the town library. People called it the essays of the old man left out of a wedding. I did not care about the name, because for me, the most precious thing I gained after the trip to Iceland was not fame or recognition. It was the feeling that I no longer had to prove anything. Not to Olivia, not to Martha, not to anyone in that family. I had lived as if being patient and loving enough would make them remember. But I came to understand, sometimes people do not remember not because they are cruel, but because they have chosen to redefine what family means. And in that definition, I no longer had a place. And the best part is, I am still living well. Very well, in fact. I hung a photo of the Northern Lights in my hallway, not to remember the hurt, but to remind myself that I once stood under that light alone. And I did not need anyone to see it shine. I was not surprised to see Olivia standing at my door on a November afternoon, the wind slipping under the eaves and yellow maple leaves scattered across the path. She had not called ahead, had not sent a message. She simply stood there in an oversized coat, eyes red, hands trembling slightly either from the cold or from what she was about to say. I opened the door without a word. She stepped inside, still Olivia, with the soft curls and the same gaze as always. Only now she looked at me like someone who had once been a safe place but no longer knew how to walk inside. She sat down by the fireplace, fingers gripping the edge of her coat, voice rough. I was wrong, Papa. I did not nod. I did not shake my head. I only looked at her, waiting. The wedding should have had you there. You should have been the first I called when I panicked, when I began to doubt Brandon's sincerity. But I didn't call. I took the chair across from her, still silent. She swallowed her tears, her gaze unsteady. He really left, right after the ceremony, walked away while I was giving my speech. I couldn't believe it. But Mom said he found out I had no inheritance. Did you know? He married me thinking I was a Dunhill heiress, but I have nothing in my name. Everything belongs to Charles and Mom. I listened to it all, slowly, without interrupting. Then I stood, went into the back room. When I returned, I carried an old wooden box. Inside was a photo of Olivia at 10, sitting on the porch steps, holding a small, shaggy dog. In the corner of the frame was my hand, shading her eyes from the sun. On the frame was the line she had once carefully written in colored marker. Papa, the first home I knew. I set the frame on the table. You gave me this when you were 10, and you believed it then. She broke into tears, covering her mouth as if afraid the sound would make me angry. But I was not angry. I only said slowly, you chose to erase the past. The consequences were not made by me. She choked, her throat too dry for words. I had no intention of rubbing salt in the wound. I only spoke what had happened. I did not accuse. I only held up a mirror. After a moment, Olivia looked up, tears still clinging to her lashes. I know. I did something that cannot be undone. But if you are still here, I would like to start again. Even just a little. I looked at her and I believed her pain was real. But there are some things, once pulled out of a person's heart, that cannot be placed back simply with tears. I answered gently, Papa never wanted to disappear from your life. But when you no longer called me home, I had to learn to walk in another direction. Olivia lowered her head. I went on. Real love does not vanish. But trust, once removed from the list, needs time to be set back. And this time, I will not be the one to take the first step. The room stayed quiet for a long while. Then Olivia nodded. No pleading, no pressing, just a small nod. Like someone beginning to understand that once you break something, you must be the one patient enough to pick up every piece. She stood, looked around the familiar house that now felt foreign, touched the frame, then let it go. I will not force you to forgive, but I will wait. Somewhere, if you ever need. I said nothing. She turned, opened the door. Before stepping out, she looked back once more. Thank you for still being Papa, even though I did not deserve it. The door closed behind her. The wind slipped in for a moment, then stopped. I stayed there, my hand brushing over the photo frame. Not crying, not smiling. Only one thought crystal clear in my mind. I had not taken revenge. I simply let them walk into the empty space they created, and when they came back, they would have to look straight at it themselves. One year after I left the United States on that fateful flight to Iceland, autumn returned to Vermont in a way softer than any year before. The cold was still the same, sharp, deep, and damp, but I no longer shivered from loneliness. I did not go back to teaching, did not write letters of apology to anyone, and did not become an old man sitting quietly at home. I became something I had never imagined, a local guide for foreign tourists, not the kind with a name tag and a loudspeaker leading large groups. I worked for a small tour company, taking guests on walks through the forest, stopping by mountain lakes, telling them about local history, the red maple leaves, the pine wood, and the old trails people had been walking for over a century. I did not need to talk much. They liked hearing me speak slowly, evenly, sometimes with a touch of dry humor that comes from being old enough not to fear being misunderstood. They asked why I knew so much. I just shrugged, because I had lived long enough in silence to learn how to hear what no one says out loud. That March, I published my first collection of essays, a small book, less than 120 pages, light gray cover, simple title. I was not invited, but I still live well. I did not think it would sell. But it turned out people wanted to hear stories without theatrics, without shouting, without demanding justice. Just the story of someone forgotten and how he chose to step out without knocking on anyone's door. Some young readers emailed to thank me. Some older ones found me at the market, shook my hand, told me they had been through the same thing but never dared to share it. Some wrote that they had stopped typing angry messages to relatives and instead booked a trip somewhere alone. I was never good at responding. I just printed those emails and pinned them to the board in my kitchen, as a reminder that maybe I had disappeared from one list, but I had stepped into another community, one where no one asks who invited you, only whether you are living truthfully. A podcast invited me to join an episode titled "The Value of People Once Considered Outdated." I agreed, but on one condition. They could not introduce me as an inspiring figure. Olivia will ever reach out to you again. I was silent for a few seconds. Then I answered, if she does, I will listen. But I am not waiting anymore, because I no longer sit in their old house hoping to be remembered. I am living in the real home that is mine. She smiled, her eyes warm with understanding. The following summer, I bought a small plot of land by the lake near town. On it stood an old wooden cabin with rusty metal roofing and a slanted floor. But I did not renovate much. I only cleared the dust, placed a wooden chair on the porch, and built a small bookshelf. Each morning I made coffee, carried it to the lake, sat there listening to the wind sweep over the water, and the children playing in the distant park. None of those children knew who I was. No one needed to know. Their laughter filled the space I once thought could never be filled. I no longer checked Olivia's Instagram. The last I heard from her was through a letter she sent herself. Short, simple. Papa, I hope you are well. I am still learning how to be a better person each day. Even if it is late, I still want to thank you for not yelling at me the way I once wished you would. I did not reply, but I folded the letter, pressed it inside my old notebook. The same way I used to keep her letters when she was little. That afternoon, I sat in my familiar wooden chair, watching the lake glow with the pale gold of sunset. The children were gone. Only the crickets and the wind remained. I took the notebook and wrote one simple line. I once thought I had been left behind, but in truth I had been set free. Not free from other people, but from the need to be acknowledged, to be kept, to be invited. Now I no longer need to be invited, because I know I always have the right to choose how I will be present in this life. And if no one remembers me, I am still here, living well, like a patch of wild grass blooming on its own.